April 1945. Europe is in ruins, and one German colonel disappears without a trace. No orders, no farewell, no witnesses. Oberst Heinrich Faulkner, a decorated officer, a scholar, a man obsessed with secrets, vanishes into the Black Forest, leaving behind only a journal, a hidden bunker, and questions no one can answer. 80 years later, the forest still guards his secrets. When a hiker uncovers the hidden vault, what's revealed shakes the whole town onto its knees. Coded symbols, underground chambers, and a life carefully preserved in silence. Was he hiding gold, protecting lives? But to understand what they found underground, we have to go back to the night he disappeared in 1945. Colonel Oberst Heinrich Faulkner had served in nearly every major campaign of the war. His name circulated in hushed tones across both Allied and Axis intelligence networks. Not because of cruelty, but because of his silence. A man of few words and flawless precision. A ghost in uniform, always on the periphery of war rooms, always one step ahead of disaster. His men followed him without question, yet none could claim to truly know him. Faulkner kept to himself, his past sealed tighter than the dossier he carried. By early April, as American tanks rolled through Bavaria and the Reich crumbled, Faulkner commanded a remote communications outpost deep within the Schwarzwald, the Black Forest. Then, in the middle of the night, he disappeared. His quarters were undisturbed, his uniform hung neatly, pistol holstered, maps missing. On the desk lay a single unfinished letter, unsigned, unsent. The first line read, "If this reaches Berlin, the vault must remain sealed." The Wehrmacht declared him a deserter. Soviet intelligence suspected defection. But the locals, they whispered of something else. A secret mission. A final order never recorded in the archives. The war ended, borders shifted, the world moved on, and Colonel Heinrich Faulkner's name sank into silence. Until decades later, when the forest began to give up its secrets. The vault must remain sealed was his last written words, and at the same time, his disappearance left no trace, until decades later, when a terrible storm will reveal a mind-blowing secret and a hiker caught in the middle. Most people will scroll away and forget this ever happened. But not you. You have stayed. So please subscribe, because some mind-blowing stories are coming your way. For decades, his name remained a footnote in forgotten military files, mentioned only in scattered testimonies and the occasional conspiracy thread, until 80 years later, when a lone hiker cutting through an overgrown stretch of the Schwarzwald stumbled upon something strange beneath the moss, a flat slab of stone, etched with faint symbols, and beneath it, a sealed iron door. What lay beyond would ignite a mystery that stretched from the ruins of Nazi Germany to the edges of modern imagination. A question resurrected after nearly a century. What really happened to Colonel Heinrich Faulkner? And why, after all this time, had his secrets refused to stay buried? To understand the disappearance, you first have to understand the man. Heinrich Faulkner wasn't like other officers in the Wehrmacht. He didn't bark orders or crave medals. He studied, he listened. He moved through battlefields like a man solving a riddle no one else could see. To many, he was the riddle, wrapped in discipline, veiled in intellect, impossible to read. Born in 1903 to a family of historians in Dresden, Faulkner was fluent in 5 languages before his 20th birthday. He studied military science, archaeology, and ancient religions. At Heidelberg University, he wrote papers on pre-Christian symbolism found in Germanic ruins. His professors called him brilliant but uneasy, too serious for his age, always observing, always apart. By 1939, he had risen quickly through the ranks, not through loyalty, but intellect. Faulkner had an uncanny ability to anticipate Allied maneuvers before they occurred. He wasn't a party ideologue. In fact, whispers suggested he despised the Reich from within. Still, he served it, quietly, precisely, until the day he disappeared. And now, decades later, someone had found the door he warned should never be opened. If you enjoy stories like this, do subscribe, 'cause more mind-chilling stories coming up in the days. He rarely attended rallies. When pressed about Hitler, he chose his words with surgical care. Some claimed he had quietly shielded Jewish academics during the early purges, though no evidence ever surfaced. But there were darker rumors too, whispers that he'd been assigned to artifact recovery missions across North Africa, that he once led a small detachment deep into the Caucasus on a mission erased from official records, that he didn't just study ancient symbols, he believed in them. Faulkner was said to carry a personal map, hand-drawn and heavily annotated, marked with Latin, Greek, and runic inscriptions no one could decipher. To some, it was meaningless scribble. To others, it was a key. To what? No one could say. His last verified sighting came on April 10th, 1945, near the southern edge of the Schwarzwald in Bavaria, a lone motorbike, a leather satchel. No convoy, no guards, just the colonel himself heading into the woods at dusk. The sun was sinking, the roads were fractured, the war was ending, and Heinrich Faulkner walked into the forest like a man keeping an appointment that couldn't be delayed. He didn't vanish in battle. He vanished on purpose. The only question was, why? And what, if anything, did he intend to take with him? In the weeks following Germany's surrender, Allied intelligence scoured every lead. Interrogation prisoners, gathering names, coded memos, intercepted chatter. And through the noise, one name began to surface, vague at first, then louder, a rumor tied not to a person but to a place. A German officer with top-level clearance. Not captured, not declared dead. A ghost carrying knowledge no one was ever meant to have. They called him Der Lewandowski, the Shadow. And according to intercepted Soviet communications, he held intelligence that could shift the balance of power long after the war ended. There were whispers of hidden vaults buried deep beneath the Alps, coded transport manifests for looted art, and a cache of Reichsbank gold large enough to rebuild a nation from ashes. His name never appeared on Allied rosters, but when American cryptographers broke the final code, the identity emerged. Colonel Heinrich Faulkner. A reconnaissance unit was deployed to a remote stretch of woodland near the Franconian border. Villagers had reported an abandoned vehicle, half hidden under fallen leaves. When soldiers arrived, they found it exactly as described. A military motorcycle, rusted from spring rain, untouched, no signs of a crash or conflict, just silence. In the side saddlebag, they discovered a silver cigarette case, gleaming unnaturally clean against the decay around it. Etched into its lid was a spiral of interlocking runes, not swastikas, not emblems, something far older. The symbols twisted into one another like a code or a seal. None of the men could read it. One dismissed it as ornamentation. Another muttered it looked Celtic, but the case felt deliberate. Not dropped, not forgotten, but left there with intent. A signal, or perhaps a warning. The artifact was logged and sent to a secure Allied facility outside Munich. 3 days later, it vanished. The record was incomplete, the logbook page torn cleanly out, and the officer who'd processed it swore he had no memory of ever signing it in. Years later, the same spiral would resurface, carved into a stone door discovered beneath the Alps, exactly where the rumors once pointed. But in 1945, no one understood its meaning. All they knew was that Colonel Heinrich Faulkner hadn't disappeared by accident. He had erased himself, and whatever he carried, he intended to keep buried. They say Oberst Faulkner vanished because he ignored the signs. The silence, the feeling of being watched, the instinct that something was wrong. Most people do the same, until it's too late. Don't wait to be the next mystery. Learn how to stay alert, grounded, and alive wherever you are. Get your survival guide How to Stay Safe in the Canyon 2025 in the pinned comment below. The clerk who processed the cigarette case later swore he had no memory of doing so. The logbook page was missing, torn out cleanly, leaving a gap where his signature should have been. Back in the forest, the commanding officer ordered a full sweep of the area. Grid by grid, every inch mapped. Nothing. No bunker. No footprints. No body. Only the kind of silence that presses on the ears. Not empty, but aware. It felt watched. Colonel Heinrich Faulkner had stepped clean off the edge of history, and whatever he carried with him, secrets, gold, or something far stranger, had gone with him. When a mystery stays unsolved long enough, it doesn't fade. It festers. It burrows deep, waiting for the right time to resurface. In the years that followed, Faulkner's name kept slipping through the cracks, a ghost in post-war archives. It appeared in fragments, intercepted memos, blacked-out reports, whispers between agencies that all ended the same way, sealed, classified, forgotten. In Washington, a 1946 intelligence memo described Faulkner as an officer of extraordinary strategic capacity and uncertain loyalty, potentially in possession of high-value Reich assets. One CIA operative even suggested recruitment if found alive, but Faulkner was never found. The trail went cold. In Moscow, the KGB maintained its own file, under the codename Uhu, the Eagle. Their analysts believed Faulkner had defected with documents detailing Soviet weaknesses along the Eastern Front. No one could prove it. No one could disprove it either. The same codename, Uhu, would later reappear in a set of encrypted transmissions uncovered nearly 80 years later, transmissions traced back to the very woods where Faulkner vanished. But in 1946, no one yet realized how deep his disappearance ran, or that the forest that had swallowed him hadn't given him up at all. You've followed Faulkner this far, don't stop now. Most people scroll past stories like this and forget, but not you. You felt something, don't just watch. Subscribe before the next secret disappears. In the margin of Colonel Heinrich Faulkner's intelligence file, written faintly in pencil, were 6 words: find the forest. Find the truth. There was no signature, no date. The note was never referenced in any report. Shortly after, the file was sealed and stored in an archive that didn't officially exist. For decades, Faulkner's name dissolved into history's background noise, overshadowed by the nuclear age, the rise of Berlin's Wall, and the long shadow of Vietnam. His disappearance became little more than a curiosity, something mentioned only by archivists who couldn't let go of unsolved cases, a ghost story in the corridors of intelligence. Then Berlin 1990, the Berlin Wall fell, and the newly unified German government began unlocking its vaults, shelves of classified documents, personal dossiers, debriefing tapes, and decades of Cold War detritus. Among them, misfiled and almost overlooked, was a microfilm reel marked in faded ink: Faulkner, status unbekannt, Faulkner, status unknown, Hebrohi. The reel contained fragments. An early US intelligence assessment, a grainy photograph of the engraved cigarette case, and a blurred aerial image taken from a reconnaissance plane sometime after the war. The photo showed a clearing deep within the Franconian forest. No roads, no buildings, just an unmistakable pattern in the earth. A perfect circle, cut into the soil as though something massive had once stood there. No one noticed. The archivist logging the find typed a short note, possibly geological, and moved on. The microfilm went back into the drawer. The forest, once again, kept its silence. The same circular pattern would later reappear on the recovered cigarette case during modern forensic imaging, a match too precise to ignore. For 50 more years, no one would return to that forest. Not until a spring morning in 2025, when a lone hiker's GPS pinged just outside that same clearing and unearthed something that should never have survived the war. He waited for help that never came. Most people do. We always think there's more time, until there isn't. Don't wait for silence to find you. Get How to Stay Safe in the Canyon 2025. It might be the smartest thing you read this year, but secrets like these don't stay buried forever. Spring 2025. The Franconian forest breathed its usual quiet. Wind moving through the treetops, wildflowers breaking through the mulch of last year's decay. To most, it was just another stretch of forgotten woodland, crumbling trails, remnants of bunkers long reclaimed by moss, the kind of place history hides when no one's watching. But for 68-year-old Hans Feller, a retired forest ranger who had spent half his life walking these hills, the forest wasn't history, it was home. He hadn't come searching for anything. He was simply revisiting old paths, chasing the stillness he missed, until the ground itself gave him a reason to stop. It began with a patch of moss that didn't belong. Too flat, too perfect. Feller crouched, pressed his palm against it, and felt the faint outline of something man-made beneath the earth. He scraped away the moss, and what stared back was not stone. It was a slab, hand-carved, its surface etched with symbols spiraling outward from a corroded metal handle. It didn't look like a door. It looked like a seal. Most would have turned back. Feller didn't. He fetched a pry bar from his pack, wedged it beneath the edge and pulled. The stone shifted with a groan, exhaling a breath of air that hadn't seen sunlight in 80 years, dry, cold, and heavy with dust. Behind it, a tunnel, narrow, uneven. The walls bore the marks of old tools, the scent of soil and rust thick in the air. Feller switched on his headlamp and stepped inside. 20 feet in, the stone gave way to wood. Rotten beams bowed overhead. The floor sagged but still held. Then came the door, wooden, burned along the edges, its surface branded with the same spiral rune he'd uncovered above. Beyond it lay a single chamber. The air was still. Dust swirled in the light of his lamp. Rusted tools lay scattered where they'd fallen decades before. Spades, chisels, an oil lantern shattered in the corner. Military crates sat stacked against one wall, stenciled with faded German lettering, Iris Agentum, army property. And on the center table, resting under a thick film of dust, was a single object that didn't belong. A silver cigarette case, smooth, immaculate, untouched by time. The spiral of interlocking runes still gleamed faintly in the beam of Keller's light. The same design that had vanished from Munich's archives in 1945, the one linked to Colonel Heinrich Faulkner's disappearance. Fella's hand trembled as he reached toward it. The metal was cold, impossibly cold. Then, as his fingers brushed its surface, his headlamp flickered once and went out. A journal, perfectly preserved inside a sealed tin box. The leather binding cracked with age, but the pages were still dry, legible, handwritten in German. The name on the first page, Heinrich Faulkner, inked with military precision. Dozens of entries followed. Dates from April to August 1945, some neat, others frantic, words bleeding into margins, sentences mixing German, Latin and code. Fella didn't know who Faulkner was, but someone would. He took the journal, left everything else untouched, and reported the sight. Within 48 hours, the forest was no longer quiet. Military historians, intelligence teams, ground scanners. The news never leaked. Officially, nothing was found. Unofficially, everything had changed. The bunker went deeper than anyone thought. Once the tunnel was reinforced, they discovered a complete self-contained hideout. Frozen in time. 2 bunks, metal frames, blankets folded tight, a rusted stove, shelves lined with ration tins stamped 1944, everything preserved, untouched, waiting. Faulkner's motorcycle had been found near this same forest decades ago. The engine still warm. On the first page of the journal, a single phrase repeated 3 times. The circle must remain unbroken. You weren't supposed to hear this story, but now you have. Subscribe before they realize you know too much. A radio antenna, detached, lay across a makeshift desk stacked with maps. Beside it, a row of books lined the far wall, dozens of them, their spines cracked, titles faded, some in German, others in Latin and French. Most were what you'd expect from a soldier: military manuals, weather almanacs, field surveys, but hidden among them were volumes that didn't belong. Esoteric treatises, books marked only with symbols, parchment notebooks filled with anatomical sketches tangled with constellations. One was written entirely backward, every word mirrored. At the back wall, painted directly on concrete, was a symbol 6 feet wide. A warped compass rose. The north, south, east and west were replaced with glyphs no one could decipher. Some looked like Norse runes, others nothing human. The paint hadn't aged. It glistened under light, as if still drying. Beneath it, in Faulkner's unmistakable handwriting, not all maps led out. Fella's find had only been to the surface. The journal confirmed what investigators feared. Faulkner hadn't disappeared by accident. He meant to. Each entry sank deeper into madness or revelation. He wrote of hearing voices in the trees, of a mission beyond war, beyond sides. In one passage, he described a dream, a burning map guiding him through a forest that never ended. When he woke, his fingers were black with soot. The same soot was later found on the stone slab Fella had moved. And on the journal's final page, a phrase underlined twice in trembling ink: "When the forest breathes again, so will I." The forest never gave him back. But you still have a chance to walk away before something takes you. Protect yourself. Learn how to move smart, stay aware, and disappear on your terms. How to Stay Safe in the Canyon, 2025, pinned below. Forensics revealed no trace of anyone else ever living there. No second handwriting, no second set of fingerprints. The rations, carefully inventoried and untouched by rodents or decay, could have sustained a single man for half a year, maybe longer with discipline. And yet, Oberst Heinrich Faulkner's final journal entry bore the date August 12, 1945. 4 months after Germany's surrender, he had survived in silence. But for what purpose? Why remain hidden when the war is over? Something about this place didn't feel like a simple refuge. It wasn't escape, it was intention. The chamber had the atmosphere of a sanctuary, a vault, perhaps even a prison. And that symbol on the wall, the warped compass, wasn't decoration. It was a direction. Faulkner's journal revealed 3 clear phases. The first, beginning in April 1945, was precise and structured, written in the clipped, efficient tone of a career officer executing orders. He mentioned his assignment only once, underlined in careful strokes: Operation Julang Spiegel. No orders followed, no coordinates, no reference, just a cryptic margin note beside a torn map fragment. He who hides truth behind a mirror never sees it break. Weeks passed in his entries. The handwriting loosened, the margins filled with calculations and odd sketches, phases of the moon, coded symbols, botanical notes. He recorded rainfall, temperature, bird migrations, routine habits of survival. But slowly the tone shifted. His reports turned inward, detached, paranoid. He wrote of watching the forest breathe at night, of hearing voices whispering in rhythms only the wind should make. And then, The last entry trailed off mid-sentence. Ink pooled at the bottom of the page, as though his hand had trembled. As investigators pieced through the final lines, one question lingered. If Faulkner had truly died there, then who sealed the vault from the outside? He began to describe the watchers in the forest. Not soldiers, not wildlife, but something nameless. They do not step on leaves, Faulkner wrote. Their silence bends the air. His tone shifted from observation to unease. In one entry he recounted a dream where the trees spoke in a language he had never learned, yet somehow understood every word. In another, he described faint knocking sounds against the stone walls of the bunker, always after dusk, never the same pattern twice. When he opened the hatch to investigate, nothing waited outside, only the stillness. Then came what analysts later called the unraveling. The crisp military penmanship disintegrated into jagged strokes. German sentences fractured into Latin incantations, then into pure symbols, the same twisted marks found within the compass painted on the wall. Certain phrases appeared again and again like desperate prayers. Cleansing comes in silence. Do not trust the sky. The old maps lie. After August 12th, the journal fell silent. No closing line, no signature, just a torn-out page, the last entry missing entirely. Most experts concluded Faulkner had descended into psychological collapse, brought on by isolation and guilt, but a few disagreed. The structure of his later notes was too deliberate, his symbols too patterned to be madness. It was as if he was coding something, or warning someone. He hadn't hidden to escape justice. He'd hidden because he believed something was coming, something older than war, older than empire, and whatever it was, Faulkner was certain it would find him in the forest first. But if that's true, then what exactly did Hans Feller disturb when he opened that vault in 2025? As attention around the bunker intensified, investigators reopened dormant archives once dismissed as irrelevant footnotes of the war. Buried among them were declassified OSS memoranda, hinting that Oberst Heinrich Faulkner possessed critical knowledge of missing Reich gold reserves, assets rumored to have vanished during the regime's final collapse. Records confirmed that several shipments of bullion, originally destined for Berlin in early 1945, were rerouted under unknown orders and never reached their destination. The operation bore no official name, no surviving paperwork, but one signature appeared again and again across the fragmented manifests. Faulkner. Even more unsettling were intelligence cables from 1947, referencing a covert network of ex-officers moving fluidly between Germany, Spain, and Argentina. This shadow organization, stitched together through forged identities, looted art, and Reich-minted gold coins, operated beneath the post-war chaos. Faulkner's name wasn't marked as a target. It carried a warning: approach only under direct authorization. Subject exhibits irregular affiliations. A Bergam. Then came the first trace of life. In a remote Bavarian village, a 95-year-old woman, frail, bedridden, and weeks from death, confided to her grandson a secret she had kept since 1948. She said a man came to her door during a snowstorm, tall, pale, wearing a heavy officer's coat. His eyes, she said, were the kind that didn't seem to focus on anything human. He offered her gold bars stamped with Reich insignias in exchange for food, but refused shelter. When she asked who he was, he merely looked toward the tree line and whispered, "Not all roads return." Then he turned and vanished into the woods. She remembered one detail too clearly to dismiss: a polished silver cigarette case marked with a spiral of runes, exactly like the one recovered from the forest decades later. Authorities logged her statement as a delusion brought on by dementia, but for those familiar with Faulkner's file, the description wasn't coincidence. It was impossible precision. If the old woman truly saw him in 1948, years after his recorded disappearance, then who or what did she feed that night? If you think this story's over, you haven't been paying attention. Subscribe now while the forest is still quiet. So, was Oberst Heinrich Faulkner truly alone? Recent satellite scans of the Franconian forest told a different story. Beneath layers of soil and overgrowth, analysts identified multiple thermal anomalies, faint but consistent evidence of a network of connected underground structures, not a solitary bunker. Just a few kilometers away, records surfaced of a hunter's cabin fire in 1952, written off as an accident. The official report cited unknown ignition, but when the site was re-examined decades later, forensic teams found charred blueprints beneath the floorboards, detailed wiring diagrams in German, and a schematic for a shortwave transmitter, powerful enough to reach North America. Those weren't the traces of a man in hiding. They were the architecture of coordination, the remains of a system that required secrecy and reach, which raised a far more dangerous question. Had Faulkner simply joined a network, or built it himself? The deeper researchers dug, the clearer the pattern became. Faulkner's disappearance wasn't isolation, it was orchestration. And if he wasn't working for the Reich or the Allies, then who or what had claimed his allegiance? That's when a new theory began to circulate, whispered first among retired operatives, then by post-war historians familiar with classified archives. What if Faulkner hadn't gone underground to protect himself, but to shield others? Within his recovered journal were pages listing names, some neatly crossed out, others circled or marked with strange symbols. When those names were cross-referenced with OSS files and British SOE records, a chilling overlap appeared: known resistance couriers, smuggling contacts, and operatives of underground escape networks that had helped Jewish families and defectors flee Nazi Germany. Faulkner, it seemed, hadn't been preserving Reich secrets. He'd been preserving people. But if that's true, then why did he surround himself with symbols that warned of silence, watchers, and cleansing? Who, or what, was he protecting them from? If this stays up, you'll want to be here when the next piece drops. Subscribe before it disappears. Even more revealing were the margin notes scrawled alongside Oberst Heinrich Faulkner's surviving map fragments, cryptic coordinates, directional arrows, and fragments of text in English, French, and Yiddish, languages he was never officially documented to use in the field. On one torn edge, nearly lost beneath a water stain, investigators deciphered 3 faint words: help them escape. Further analysis tied his sketches to known Allied extraction corridors, routes used in 1944-45 to smuggle persecuted families, scientists, and defectors out of Nazi-occupied Europe. Faulkner didn't just know about these paths. He may have been one of the architects who designed them. If that's true, it rewrote everything. The once loyal Wehrmacht colonel wasn't just hiding gold or secrets. He may have been acting as a double agent, not for any government or intelligence network, but for something far more dangerous under that regime: his conscience. Some historians believe Operation Julang Spiegel wasn't a codename for retreat at all. It was a cover for sabotage. Faulkner had direct access to Reich supply manifests, hidden transport convoys, and coded routes used for stolen art and gold transfers. If he couldn't end the war, he could fracture its machinery, scatter its wealth, hide its evidence, and erase its trail. But buried in those same pages was a darker thread: guilt. His final entries turned confessional, almost penitent. He wrote not of fear, but of a debt unpaid. I saved some, one passage reads, but not enough. The silence keeps count. And then, beneath an ink blot that had bled through 2 pages, a single line: the bunker is not a refuge, it is a reckoning. The compass symbol painted on the bunker wall may never have been a navigational aid at all. It could have been a marker of penance, a map pointing inward, not outward, a place not to flee from history, but to face it. But as investigators would soon learn, the bunker's reckoning wasn't over, because the deeper they dug, the more it seemed Faulkner's debt might still be waiting to be paid. He left no goodbye, just a journal and a question nobody could answer. Would you survive what he saw? Ind out before you need to. How to Stay Safe in the Canyon 2025. Link in the pinned comment. So the question deepened. Did Oberst Heinrich Faulkner vanish to guard a hidden fortune, or to bury something far more dangerous, the truth itself? Whatever the answer, his role in the final days of the Reich was no longer one of loyalty or treason. It had become something far murkier and far more human. When the first survey teams arrived with portable LiDAR scanners, they expected to find a single sealed bunker, a wartime curiosity at best. But what appeared on their monitors redrew everything they thought they knew about the forest. Beneath the dense canopy of the Franconian woods, invisible to the naked eye, stretched a network of underground chambers, a lattice of voids and passageways, some partially collapsed, others perfectly preserved, each connected by narrow tunnels, branching like veins under the hillside. Above ground there was nothing, just moss, trees, and silence. But underground, the story changed. The walls were scorched, blackened in patches that spoke of small fires built for warmth. Makeshift weather instruments, glass jars wired with copper, rested in carved-out alcoves. On the floor, a scattering of shoes, worn down to the fabric, soles split, heels crumbling, and on a single tin plate etched with a trembling hand, hundreds of tally marks. This had never been a mere hideout. It had been a life. When forensic teams catalogued the artifacts, the truth cut deeper. Some of the shoes were far too small, belonging to a child. Another was a woman's heel, cracked, covered in dust. None of it matched Faulkner's size, nor any military record from his known associates. Whoever they were, they had been here, lived here, perhaps even died here. But there were no names, no remains, no final trace, just the faint echo of survival carved into the dark. But one fragment recovered from the deepest chamber, a half-burned scrap of paper bearing Faulkner's handwriting, would soon suggest that not everyone who entered those tunnels was meant to leave them. The LiDAR scans stretched nearly a full kilometre, far beyond what anyone had imagined, revealing a labyrinth that wasn't the work of a desperate man clawing at stone. It was deliberate, engineered. Whoever built it hadn't planned to escape. He'd planned to endure. That discovery rewrote the question entirely. Had Oberst Heinrich Faulkner truly lived in exile, alone beneath the forest? Or had he constructed something larger? A network, a sanctuary, or perhaps a prison? His recovered journal only deepened the unease. There were cryptic mentions of watches and mirrors, but never any names. The detailed rationing schedules, supply caches, and mapped-out maintenance routes suggested organization, even cooperation. Yet the handwriting, every mark, every signature, was his alone. For 80 years, the forest kept its silence. The tunnels collapsed. Entrances vanished beneath moss and loam. The clearings where air vents once stood were reclaimed by trees, their roots twisting through stone. But one question refused to die. Was Faulkner hiding from the world, or was the world hiding what he became? Then, deep near the end of the journal, where the paper had yellowed and curled from damp, archivists found a cluster of entries dated 1957, 12 years after the war's end. The dates alone shattered what historians believed possible. If authentic, it meant Faulkner had survived far longer than anyone thought. A decade underground, maybe more, maybe never leaving at all. But the tone of those later pages had changed completely. Gone was the precision of a soldier's mind. The maps, the calculations, the calm. The writing devolved into chaos. Sentences dissolved mid-thought. Latin blended with German, then symbols, then gibberish. Whole pages were consumed by a single line, written again and again, until the ink tore through the page. And on the very last page, written in trembling strokes, was a phrase investigators would later struggle to translate. A warning or a confession, followed by coordinates that led nowhere found on any map. Shadows remember, one entry began. The forest keeps what it takes, the price of survival. From there, the journal descended into something darker. Faulkner wrote of hearing voices in the woods, not the cries of animals or the distant tread of soldiers, but something else. They knock at the stone when the moon is low, he scribbled. They do not eat, they do not sleep, but they remember me. Another page spoke of the ones beneath the roots, and of a mirror I cannot break. Then, near the very end, on a page torn down the middle, the ink smeared as if written with a trembling hand, appeared. A final line. They will come for me when silence returns. That was the last thing Oberst Heinrich Faulkner ever wrote. No date, no coordinates, no signature. After that, the journal simply stopped, as if the ink itself had gone cold. Was it madness? A mind unraveling after years of isolation underground? Or had Faulkner truly witnessed something in those woods, something ancient, something that watched as wars rose and fell? Investigators can't agree. Some call his writings the ramblings of a man consumed by guilt. Others see a coded confession, a record of experiments or disappearances tied to a network that predated the Cold War itself. But one fact remains undisputed. In 1957, long after the world had forgotten him, Heinrich Faulkner was still alive, still writing, still waiting, for what or for whom, no one can say. And in the Franconian forest, where moss swallows stone and sound dies before it echoes, the locals say the same thing to this day. The forest does not forget, and neither do the shadows. Decades later, when new scans revealed a sealed tunnel never breached before, investigators found something just beyond its threshold. A mirror, perfectly preserved, with a single fingerprint pressed into the dust. Today, the site remains sealed off. Temporary fencing, no signage, no explanation. Just quiet. The forest has reclaimed what it once concealed. But word always finds its way through. The name Oberst Heinrich Faulkner has outgrown the reports, the files, the bunker itself. Historians call it a rediscovery, a window into one man's descent. Others call it something else, a message buried under 80 years of silence. Researchers analyze every inch, every symbol painted across those walls. Military experts study his survival tactics, while linguists debate the strange transitions between German, Latin, and whatever came. But beyond the academics, the story has taken a darker turn. Conspiracy theorists speak of a network that never dissolved, men who vanished when the Reich fell and resurfaced in new identities, new continents. Some claim Faulkner was part of them. Others say he was running from them. Then there are those who don't see a soldier at all. They see a gatekeeper, someone left behind to guard what shouldn't have survived the war. Paranormal investigators who've entered the site talk of static, battery drains, and sounds that come from nowhere. They say the air shifts when you stand near the bunker. The moss feels colder. And sometimes when the moon is low, they hear it, a knock against the stone. Just like Oberst Heinrich Faulkner wrote, they study the final pages of the journal, the ones that whisper more than they explain. The voices, the watchers, and that final, haunting line written in a trembling hand. They will come for me when silence returns. The phrase has escaped the archives now. It echoes across message boards, whispered on late-night radio shows, dissected in dimly lit podcasts. They say the bunker disturbs compasses, that cameras freeze when pointed toward its entrance, that even the birds refuse to nest within 200 meters of the site. But through all the noise, one truth cuts through. Oberst Heinrich Faulkner's body was never found. The journal ends. The boots remain under the bunk. The compass on the wall still points nowhere. But the man himself, gone. No bones, no grave, just a hollow space in the forest floor where something once waited. Was Faulkner a fugitive, fleeing the justice he knew was coming? A hidden savior, shielding lives from behind enemy lines? Or something else entirely? A man who saw the edge of the world and chose to step beyond it? All anyone knows is this. For 80 years, a man history forgot lived and likely died beneath those trees, and the forest, patient as time itself, never gave him back. Just like Faulkner's silence, not every secret stays buried. This story was chilling, but the one waiting on the right side of your screen goes even deeper.